Okay, the finish of the duels in the arena chapter. The crowd was roaring on the team. The cry of "Hope! Hope!" was taken up around the amphitheatre, even by those who had no relationship to the district. Without a word being said, they shared a feeling that this moment could be a piece of history. It was impossible to believe it yet, but perhaps the team from a small district could beat the mighty Micklegard team after all. The great mage Thorkel was down, unheard of. Could this day mark the end of the careers of 4 legendary dragon slayers? Wolf leapt from rock to rock, tongue lolling. As he approached the 4 Hope players, Rolfson and his warrior companion lifted their swords and shields, but Wolf was not seeking to fight them. His charge swerved at the last moment, and from a boulder he launched himself over the fighters to land on Sigurda, Bjorn and Ingeborg's mother, the healer of the team. Ignoring the blows of the fighters, which did not seem to be making any impressions on his thick hide, Wolf savaged at Sigurda's throat until she was dead. Snarling, he then turned towards the 2 warriors, mouth a bloody grin. "Silver weapons! We need silver or magic," B.E. said anxiously. From the shadows behind the wolf, a motion, a flashing of blades. The wolf howled and swirled about to see the source of the blows that had unexpectedly pierced him. The mysterious elf stood before him, slowly rotating his 2 short swords, parrying lunges from the snarling fangs of the wolf. Again the crowd was on its feet, cheering. Erik took the opportunity to examine more closely his dad's character. It was a wood elf, smaller than a she, but stronger looking. His armour was mainly leather, but it was beautifully scrolled, suggesting it might be magic. From beneath the elf's cape, Erik could see the glimmer of golden hair, an unusual indulgence, and the only clue that the character was indeed that of his father. The wolf was clearly slowing down, and from its panting mouth long trails of saliva hung to the ground, full of foam. "Those swords must be poisoned," observed Bjorn. "Agreed." B.E. was raptly attentive to the battle. While Wolf panted in a more and more laboured fashion, Erik looked back to the Central Allocations team. The remaining members were not idle. Cleed had planted her skull-capped staff in the chest of the body that she stood over. With a flourish, she gestured towards the 2-blade-wielding wood elf who was causing them so much consternation. Thorkel's reanimated body slowly rose from the ground, then turned to face its target and flew towards him. "Death and destruction, what is that?" whispered Ingeborg. "I have no idea." B.E. clenched his hands together, conveying his dismay, despite wearing a stock expression on the grey, slabbed face of his warrior. Harold was glancing up from the dying wolf from time to time, and had seen the incoming undead creature. He ran back into the shadows and disappeared once more, but the zombie version of Thorkel was not misled by the concealment. It constantly altered its flight, indicating the route of Harold's movements. A flock of ravens cawed and screamed as it suddenly flew over the sides of the amphitheatre and dived towards the conflict. Cleed had thrown back her purple robe and was screaming, arms aloft, white hair streaming into the sky, as she directed the birds down onto the other Hope team members. The Hope mage managed to point and direct a burst of fire at the birds, many of which fell and flopped to the ground, but there were thousands of ravens in the cloud, and soon they had surrounded the 3 visible Hope players. Rolfson and his companions were only able to thrash around, running into rocks to dislodge the wicked stabs of the flapping creatures. The mage, the least well-armoured and without a helm, fell, hands wrapped around his eyes. In an instant, he was completely engulfed in a writhing black carpet of birds, and shortly afterwards stopped moving. The 2 warriors fought on, heads ducked, swinging sword and shield, at the ravens that were crowning and pecking at them. The zombie indicated by its remorseless chase that Harold was moving swiftly around and around the perimeter. "Where's he going?" wondered B.E. "Well, what to do?" answered Erik bitterly. "He's stuck. If he stops, he'll be killed. If he attacks Halfdan and Brynhild, he can't possibly win, and the zombie will be on him in no time." With a lurch, the zombie directed itself towards the Central Allocations team. "There he goes," said Ingeborg. Halfdan and Brynhild braced themselves, weapons raised, and were ready as Harold materialized before them. But, ducking under their blows, he did not stop to fight. His swords were not even in his hands. Instead, with a tumble, he rolled through their thrusts and seized the staff of Cleed with both hands. With a great yank, he twisted her off balance and, Although Halfdan slashed down a blow onto his shoulder that caused him to stagger, Harold recovered to sprint away, holding the staff above him like a trophy, to the pleasure of the crowd, which redoubled its volume of cheers. In fact, as Erik looked down into the stadium, he could see considerably more people in the arena than when the fighting had begun. Somehow the word was spreading, and more people were clipping up to Epic in order to see the duel. Once clear of his opponents, Harold pointed the staff back at Hlid, manipulating the skull. She looked aghast and turned to see the zombie Thorkel abruptly halt in its flight and then start moving towards her with arms raised. Hlid shouted out panic spells, but the zombie came on. Halfdan and Brynhild struck the creature with mighty blows, and although it shuddered, it knocked them aside to grasp Hlid by the throat and squeeze the life out of her. With her death, Thorkel fell to the ground, once more a fleshy bag of bones. Hope! Hope! It was the giant killing of the century. A great roar of approval rang out as Harold brandished his swords again, saluting the 4 directions of the compass before once more stepping into the shadows and disappearing. 3 down. "Your dad is incredible!" Ingeborg gave Erik a hug. Erik was immobile, shivering all over, his body basking in the release of a deep tension that he had not realized it had contained. There was a strange taste in his mouth, which he understood to be the taste of vengeance fulfilled. "I'll never underestimate a thief again," Bjorn muttered to himself. Down on the floor of the amphitheatre there was a lull. Rolfson and his comrade had killed the last of the ravens and were drinking healing potions to restore themselves. The mage, however, had died under the assault of the birds. At the other end of the rocky fighting arena, Halfdan and Brynhild stood back to back, alert for the thief. An announcement came over the amphitheatre. "Hope team offer a tie. Full resurrection to all equipment restored, providing a reappraisal is taken of the solar panel allocation." A warm ripple of applause greeted the statement. "That's sensible," B.E. explained. "It's a good result for us, and they will find it difficult to refuse. If they try to carry on but end up losing their lives, there is no coming back for any of them." The announcement had clearly divided Halfdan and Brynhild, who, while remaining back to back, were animatedly turning their heads over their shoulders and gesturing, their weapons exaggerating the sweeping arm movements. After some time, the crowd began a slow hand clap. Erik joined in with a sense of extraordinary liberation. The gods of the game were being humbled, and the crowd, being quick to sense it, added to their humiliation. As the noise of the clap built up to resound around the amphitheatre, Brynhild shrugged and sheathed her weapon. Halfdan raised his sword and waved acceptance. The conflict had resulted in a tie, and the matter will be reviewed. Great cheers were raised for Rolfson and the remaining Hope warrior as they walked, waving joyfully from the amphitheatre. The crowd would have loved another glimpse of their master thief, but he did not reappear, which, as the amateur tacticians explained at the party in Hope that night, was a wise move. Last to leave were Halfdan and Brynhild, still brandishing their weapons in vehement disagreement. So there we go. Hope District managing a draw somehow. See what happens tomorrow.